So, my name is Christine Slobogin, and I am the author of the new book, Putting Plastic Surgery on Paper: How Art and Archives Defined Second World War Reconstructive Surgery in Britain. It'll be out in June 2025 with Boyd Ellen Brewer and with the University of Rochester Press as part of the series Rochester Studies in Medical History. So, this book looks at Second World War plastic surgery through the lens of art, artists, and archives, showing how this medical discipline in particular is really deeply tied to art and to art history. And so I focus on the archival collections of British plastic surgery, and then I also focus on two artists in particular to help to tell this story of art and plastic surgery in this period. And those two artists are Diana, or Dickie, Orpen, and she was a medical illustrator working in plastic surgery wards during the Second World War. And then the second artist is the photographer Percy Hennell. And so this book really shows how their works and their materials and their experiences, as well as how their photographs and drawings are stored in archives today, can help us to tell a new and more visual and more holistic history of plastic surgery that doesn't just focus on the perspective of the surgeons. So I came to Second World War plastic surgery actually through the First World War, and I became completely enamored with the really fascinating and really emotional pastel portraits of injured servicemen by Henry Tonks. And these were kind of my first exposure to an art history that wasn't, from the canon, right? This was art in places that you wouldn't expect it, in the surgical ward, in the hospital, during war. And so I kind of devoured everything that had been written about Tonks and about the First World War and facial injury and art. And that is how I came to find Dickie Orpen, who was one of Henry Tonks's mentees at the Slade School of Fine Art. And he was a great mentor of hers. I then fell in love with her work, her drawings, her humor, and her perseverance during the Second World War. And she really showed me that plastic surgery in this period would have been impossible, or at least very, very different, without its artists and without its extensive visual culture practices. So that really became the genesis of this book project. The primary archive that I use for this publication is the archive of the British Association of Plastic, Reconstructive, and Aesthetic Surgeons, or BOPRAS, and I use that acronym a lot. And BOPRAS is actually the focus of the first three chapters of the book. So I spend a lot of time digging into this archive and how the way that it has purported to tell the history of British plastic surgery can be challenged or refuted or analyzed in different ways if we're thinking about art as the center of plastic surgery in this period. So the materials that I look at primarily in BOPRAS are the photographs and drawings by Dickie Orpen and Percy Hennell. And I don't only look at these materials separately, but I think about how they compare to one another, especially on the kind of affective and emotional dimensions. And in addition to the BOPRAS archive, I was also gifted a backpack full of personal papers, archival material from one of Dickie Orpen's sons. And this was such a treasure trove of material. This is where most of the cartoons that I analyzed by Dickie Orpen can be found. And it really helped to nuance the project and help to nuance my understanding of what working in a plastic surgery ward in the Second World War would have been like. I would have to say that one of the most important images in the book is the very first one. And this is a drawing by Dickie Orpen of a patient that I call Ellis, and you can see him from three perspectives. I use this drawing really to argue that Dickie Orpen is using some of the conventions from art history. So the triple portrait convention that was used by painters to help sculptors make sculpted portraits. Dickie Orpen is very knowingly using this art historical convention to suggest that plastic surgeons were also sculptors. This image really helps to set up the parallels that I'm making between art history and surgical history. Two photographs from Percy Hennell that stand out to me are his two photographs of this unnamed woman patient with red lipstick and beautiful hair, lovely clothes that really seems out of place in a plastic surgery ward. They look like portraits if you don't notice the dent in her forehead in the first image. And it helps to really beautifully connect Percy Hennell's Second World War plastic surgery photographs with his Second World War propagandistic work, which um, is really at its height in his 1943 book, British Women Go to War. It's almost like these plastic surgery portraits could be from British Women Go to War. One argument that I think is really important is in the very last chapter of the book, and it basically argues that Percy Hennell's photography was a visual method of propaganda that was used by plastic surgeons to proselytize their field, and to spread certain narratives about their field in Britain and internationally. And that's definitely a thread throughout the book is how visuals help to push certain narratives about plastic surgery and plastic surgeons. So Harold Gillies, a really famous plastic surgeon, actually used Hennell's photographs and brought Hennell along with him on this kind of propagandistic lecture tour in North and South America. And then I compare the photographs that Hennell took in the wards to the blatantly propagandistic works that he made, such as 1943's British Women Go to War, which was all about the really valiant war effort of Britain's women. And then another argument from this book that I think is really fun, as well as being really important, shows up in chapter 5. And that's where I argue that Dickie Orpen's humor in her cartoons helped to queer the surgical ward by upending the hierarchies that are present in the hospital and in the ward. And Dickie Orpen actually depicts herself as a male orderly in these cartoons. And so that's where I get that idea of queering through this gender bending that Dickie Orpen does on the page. And through this character, through this avatar, she's able to poke fun at the surgeons around her in a really interesting and I think quite radical way. I think that this history of tying art and artists to plastic surgery is still very much present in the way that plastic surgeons think of themselves and their field. It's thought of as a very artistic field. And we can see evidence of this in recent publications in plastic surgery journals. And then I also think that it's important to show how plastic surgery has influenced the art world as well as art influencing the plastic surgery world. And there are quite a few artists from the last several decades who have used plastic surgery as their paintbrush, as their method of creating art. So artists like Orlan or Stellark have used plastic surgery in their art. And so we can see in more recent histories, or even today, how plastic surgery and art continue to influence each other in really important and interesting and exciting ways.